It's a real privilege to be here, so thank you, Chris, for the invitation. I do enjoy speaking about fatherhood. Normally I just speak to dads, so it's a wonderful opportunity to be here and speak to families with young kids, and also great to have some teenagers and young adults here as well. So I hope that what I have to say that's on my heart will be of use to all of you. And I don't think it's any coincidence that some of what I'm going to say actually is complementary to what we've heard already. As I've listened to the speakers this morning, I've realised that there are some common themes coming through, so look out for those. I want to start with a passage from Philippians 4:17, and this is where Paul is talking to the Philippians, and he's talking about being content. And he says, I know what it's like to be in need, and I know what it's like to have plenty, but I am content. But then that's the context for which he then says, not that I desire your gifts, what I desire is that more be credited to your account. And when I read that, God really spoke to me that that's something for me to take on board about being a dad and being a parent. That what's most important is not about me and what I have and the material things, but it's about speaking into the lives of others, and for me, speaking into the lives of my family. So I can be content whether I have much or whether I have little, but what's most important is to credit into other people's accounts. And I'd like to think that what I could say this morning is crediting something into your account. So just a brief introduction, then. I'm married to Linda. We've been married nearly 24 years, so we're off to a good start. And we have 4 children who are young adults. We have 3 boys and a daughter, and I've brought one example of my family here this morning. So Timothy's here, he's 19. And I have a very, very much a personal interest and a professional interest in fathers and family and families. So just briefly, my personal background, which I want to bring to this a little bit more as I go on, is that I grew up without my dad. So from the age of 5, my dad had other priorities. His priority was alcohol. So from the age of 5, my parents divorced, and I had very little to do with my dad for the rest of his life and the rest of my life. Did go to his funeral, and on his casket at his funeral, his mates had put a bottle of beer. And it really, that was difficult, but it really got me thinking about the legacy that he left me. So at the end of his 70-odd years, he had a bottle of beer on his casket. That was the most important thing that people wanted to remember him by. And I thought, that's not going to be my legacy to my children. So I have a very strong personal motivation in that regard. As Chris mentioned, also have a professional opportunity to work with dads through my work at the university. God called me to nursing when I was 18 years old. That's not what I wanted to do as an 18-year-old young man. I had other plans, but God has graciously brought me through that. And now I have opportunity as a researcher to meet with a lot of men and talk to them about fatherhood. A lot of these men are not in churches. In fact, they're vulnerable, they're in difficult situations, their families are in strife, and I've had opportunity to talk to a lot of men to find out what it is to be a dad and what they think it is to be a dad. So what I want to do is to try and combine the personal and the professional in the next 15 minutes or so. What I've learned from doing research and talking to men is that we don't all start fatherhood on an equal footing. Very often we hear about fatherhood classes and educating dads about being good dads. What I've discovered, which is not, it's not really academic, it's just the fact that I don't think we all start on an equal footing. So you think about men when your wife was pregnant for the first time, and just, I wonder how many of you, when you realised that you were going to be a dad, you reflected on what you knew and who taught you. Because that's what I find. A lot of men reflect on what it means to be a dad. What do I know about being a father? Because I'm about to become one. And so it's important for me to figure that out. And a lot of men reflect on the influence of their own father. And that's what I did too. In talking to a lot of men, and I'm just sort of summarising some things that men have said. So when I talk to men about fatherhood, they describe several different categories, and I'm wondering if some of you men might fit into these categories. So some men will say, I had a fantastic dad, he was brilliant, the ideal father, he was wonderful, and I want to be just like him. And so they come to fatherhood with a wonderful model and a history and a legacy and an inheritance that's very positive. And they're ready to hit the ground running. Other men say, I had a good father, but you know what, I think I could make some improvements on him. So I'm going to do the sorts of things that he did, but I'm going to improve a little bit, make a few tweaks and be a bit better. Unfortunately, some men say, I had a very poor father. I had a very abusive upbringing at the hands of my father. And they say, I want to be the complete opposite of him. I want to be all that he was not. And then there are other men who say, well, I really didn't have a dad for various reasons. He just wasn't in my life. And so I'm kind of starting with a clean slate. So I'm going to be a father, but I just don't know what to do. And that was my experience. When I became a dad, I was one of those men who was wondering, what do I do? Because my inheritance from my own father was very poor. So I really started thinking, well, I'll just have to give it a crack, as some men say. Give it a go, see what happens, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes. But regardless of our own inheritance as dads, there's some things that we have in common. Now, whether you're ready to hit the ground running or whether you, like me, had a clean slate, just really don't know what to do, we have some things in common, and one is that God has given us precious gifts in our children. And so regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of our inheritance, good or bad, we still have responsibilities to be a good dad and to bring up our kids in the way of the Lord. So for some men, that's more of a challenge, I think, than others. The good news is that God helps us. And so for me, I think, okay, my inheritance was not great, but I want to leave a better legacy than my dad left me. And I know a lot of men would like to do that. So I think of the simple equation as my inheritance plus God equals legacy. That's the way I see it. I have to be honest and say that there's some good things and some bad things about my own personal background. So one of the good things was that because my dad wasn't around, because I had this clean slate and didn't know what to do, I was very, very strongly motivated. I really, really wanted to be a good dad. I wanted to leave a legacy at the end of my life different to my dad. And so that motivation has been great. It's been really good. And so I've tried really hard over the years. Now that I'm old and I have older kids, I can look back, as you do, and think, have I done enough? What have I done? How well did I do? And so that reflection is a part of where I'm at in my parenting journey. But I have to be honest and say that even though that was a good thing, the motivation for me was there, very strong motivation to be a good dad. I was really looking for ways of doing. So what does a good dad do? And I think I've done a lot of things. I've been a dad who has done stuff to build relationships with his kids, and I feel good about that. But a little while ago, I felt the Lord was sort of saying something to me, and it was about my priorities. And even though that was a good thing, the motivation was a good thing, and it's had a good outcome, I believe, I got thinking about my priorities, and what I realised was that because of my background, because of my strong motivation, I've spent most of my time trying to be a good dad, and that's good. I haven't spent as much time trying to be the best husband that I can be. You'd have to ask my wife, but I think I've been a good husband. But that hasn't been my priority. And then if I think about that some more, I think, yes, I was trying to be a good dad, I was trying to be a good husband, but trying to be a man of God just kind of was not high on my priority list. So it kind of went, good dad, good husband, man of God. And I felt God was challenging me, and still is, to get those priorities turned around. And I think that although being a great dad, being a great husband is fantastic, and I would strongly encourage that, I think in my circumstance, and talking to a lot of other men, God was challenging me to nurture my own faith as a priority. So being a man of God, being a great husband, and then being a great father. So for me, it's about turning those priorities around, all being important. So why is it so important that men nurture their own faith? And I think it's important because I have to be strong. I have to be a leader in my family. I have to be aware of what's happening. And for me, it comes down to some issues of protection of myself and protection of my family. And being a protector and a provider, even among the men that I talk to who are not in the church, who don't know Christ, being a protector and a provider are two things that are strongly valued. So I want to talk about protection. The reason I want to protect myself is if we look at a passage like Ephesians 4:22 to 24, it says, "You were taught with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness." So we have an old self that is desiring all the time to reassert. An old self and a new self. We're to put on the we're to put off the old self and put on the new self. And we could talk about that in terms of sin, but I think the old self is constantly trying to reassert. And so I need to constantly put on the new self on a daily basis. The other reason that's kind of been mentioned already this morning is that the devil is constantly seeking us out and looking for opportunity to derail us and derail our families. So in Job 1 and 2, God asks Satan, "Where have you come from?" and asks that question twice, and twice Satan responds, roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. And 1 Peter 5:8 says, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." So this was mentioned previously by a speaker. So this spoke to me because it sort of spoke to me as if the devil is around all the time looking for someone to devour. If that person is me, and if I'm not alert and sober-minded, then I'm going to be devoured. And if I'm devoured, my family will be destroyed. I will be destroyed, my family will be destroyed. And so I think for me there's a very strong motivation to actually not just be a good husband, not just to be a good father, but to nurture my own faith on a daily basis so that I can protect me and I can ask God to protect me so that I can then leave my family without those negative effects. It's kind of like the devil's coming to a neighbourhood near you. The devil's coming to your house. And we think of the sorts of things that come into our homes through the internet, or potentially. And I'm responsible for those things. So I guess my message is around men. So often, as I did as a young dad, I heard so much about how to be a good dad, the things that I needed to do, the responsibilities that I had, and that's great, do those things. But I didn't hear so much about taking care of yourself, nurturing your own faith, asking God to help you on a daily basis and protecting your family. A few other passages that help with this in terms of the how do you do that. John 15 really spoke to me. So in John 15, if you read through that, about the vine and the branches, and it's about, what struck me was remain in me or abide in me. And if you read through those passages, it says remain in me, remain in me, remain in me, remain in me, or abide in me, abide in me, abide in me, abide in me. And it says that many, many times. And so I believe that in order to remain in him and abide in him, I need to do that on a daily basis. Ephesians 6:10 through 20 is about the armour of God. So many of us have heard about the armour of God and putting that on. And so I think it's important for protection to put that on as men daily. And I'd like you also to be encouraged by 2 Chronicles 16:9, which says, "For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him." So not only is the devil roaming around, prowling around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour, God is also there. His eyes are ranging throughout the earth to strengthen us whose hearts are fully committed to him. So there are some notes at the back, and there are some questions to consider, and then there's a challenge to men. And this is my challenge to you. So first of all, I think if we can consider what inheritance we have each received from our own father, think about the influence that that has had on us as a man, as a husband, and as a father. And ask yourself, do I make my faith a priority in addition to my roles as a husband and father? So am I taking care of myself? And the challenge is to commit to a meeting time with God on your own without interruption. Now, some of you will be doing that, but do you do that on a regular basis? Are you protecting yourself? Reflect on your inheritance and bring your strengths and weaknesses before God. So think about your inheritance. What did you receive from your father? What's your motivation for being a man of God, a husband, and a father? Ask God to equip you and walk with you as a Christian, and commit to a regular time to seek God's grace and wisdom. And pray for protection over your family. We live in a rural area. There's lots of lambs around at the moment. And I just look at those lambs, which are very cute, but they're also very vulnerable. And I think of our children being like those lambs, and how if the devil is prowling around looking for someone to devour, then it's my responsibility on a daily basis to protect myself and protect my family through prayer.
Thanks, Jeff, for show appreciation, sharing.